the 15th edition of PWC's report on non-executive directors' practices, fees, and trends. And this year, many more questions are being raised about governance and accountability across South African boards. The report also asks company directors about the issues that directly affect them in their different organizations. Joining us now to talk more on this is Leila Ebrahimi, who's the reward practice co-lead at PWC. Leila, thank you for your time. Your survey comes at a very interesting time in the South African environment, and I wonder if any of your respondents were concerned about corporate governance in South Africa and some of the boards that they sit on.
Kapano, good evening. Yes, I think there was definitely a lot of concerns. One of the questions we asked are, what are the priorities and what are the risks that you're seeing as non-executive directors? Interestingly, governance wasn't one of the top ones, although, you could kind of read into some of the responses. So I'll give you the top ones. Social inequality was top of the list. Health risks, naturally, I think that's to be assumed. And macroeconomic volatility on operations, obviously up there, and I think, quite topical to what you've been talking about this evening, and digital disruption. So not governance per se, but definitely topics that are very much linked to the theme of governance.
And a lot of these companies, or the respondents at least, that you surveyed in this survey specifically, are from JSE top list 100 companies, correct?
That's right.
So, I wonder if we've seen so many instances of companies on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange having corporate governance issues, why it wouldn't come up as a concern for them. Did you probe a little more on that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that came up, and I think it's purely as a result of other things kind of taking priority, was board dynamics. And I think that very much speaks to the issue around governance, as well as legislative and regulatory changes. So I don't think that it's not a concern. Certainly some of the responses that we got in the survey and some of the themes that came up certainly pointed to boardroom dynamics being something that need to be explored. And we've, done a whole article on that, talking about biases that could exist in the boardroom and what the boardroom culture is like, and how does one start to address those in order to ensure that efficient and effective decision-making is made by the board. And I think one thing that I want to mention there is boards these days are faced with so much information. It's like information overload. But on the other hand, they don't necessarily feel that they have the information that they need to make the decisions that they're being asked to make. So, something that we've explored and we've been talking about as PwC is how can we effectively harness technology. And, digital disruption obviously is one of the fears or one of the risks that were identified. But how do we actually harness technology and ensure that we can cut through the data by analytics and make sure that the directors have access to the information they need in real time in the format that is useful to them?
One of the other interesting points that I found while reading the report was around the gender dynamics and the amount of male versus female members that sit on boards across the country. This is a constant and recurring conversation, but it's not getting any better. There's still significantly more men who sit on boards than there are women.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's frustrating to see the slow progress, and it's consistently about 70-30, 70 obviously being the males and 30% being the females. And there isn't really much significant movement year on year when we do this research. I think we're all hoping for that hallelujah moment, but it isn't really happening. And I think that speaks to some of the things such as succession planning and recruitment and issues like that, which are some of the softer issues that were highlighted, but you'll notice that they don't necessarily come up in the top risks for the directors. So the question we're then asking is, if they are not in the top risks or the top priorities, is that not speaking to why we're not seeing much movement on those? And we all know that all the while that there's not, there's obviously the requirement to publish a policy, but all the while that there's no accountability for targets which are set, these are the kinds of things we're unfortunately going to experience, which is very slow movement or little movement.
One of those risks, we talked about it earlier, that you mentioned around social inequality, how our board members feel about the macroeconomic conditions in the country, brings up the very concerning or the often spoken about issue of remuneration on the boards. So I noticed that some respondents did say that they were concerned about the pay gaps between them as board directors or the highest earning executive and the lowest earning member in the team. But often in those conversations, it's just a by the way. What are the solutions they're putting forward to some of these risks they've identified?
Yeah, I think it's always a topical and a sensitive one, especially in light of the Companies Act amendments, which are currently being discussed and debated. One of which is the mandatory disclosure of the wage gap between the highest and the lowest paid employees. So certainly it's top of mind. The problem is, a ratio like that, whilst it's progress in the right direction in terms of disclosure, it doesn't really solve the problem of are you paying a living wage to your lowest level employees. And that's something we explore in one of our articles talking about, are your employees among the working poor, which is it's quite the title there, but we're really trying to draw attention to the fact that it's not just about the gap, it's also about paying a dignified wage to the lowest level employees. In terms of what boards are doing to address that, I think it falls within the ambit of the greater ESG priority that most boards are grappling with at the moment. And we asked the question, who has a fair pay policy? And it was interesting, whilst I think it was 98% of companies are either in the process of developing an ESG strategy or already have one. It was about half-half in the 98%. Only 50% of companies actually have a fair pay policy. And that really is the first and basic step to addressing fair pay within your organization, because it asks the question, what do you believe in? What is your philosophy? And then what practical practices and policies do you have in place to actually put that into effect? So I think the fact that 50% of companies only have a fair pay policy, and the Department of Labour has obviously been asking for this for a while, what with the EEA4 form updates of a few years ago already, that I think was quite sobering for us.
Leila, I mean, that really brings the question again about what they're going to do or practical solutions home. But I wonder, in the next year's report, are you hoping to see something significantly different from what you saw now? And also, in addition to that, what trends have you seen that have changed in your reporting over the last 15 years?
Yeah, it's a long time, and I think we've been predicting that ESG is going to be the big thing, and everybody's going to start linking ESG into the short-term incentive and long-term incentive, and everyone's going to start talking about fair pay, and those trends were slow coming. Obviously, a lot of things changed with COVID and so on, and we have seen accelerated trends, but definitely this year has been the year where not only, ESG, not only from a climate change and climate risk perspective, but obviously from a social inequality perspective, have really come to light, and boards really are grappling with these. And I think, the occurrences that we had during the year last year certainly brought some of these issues to the forefront, and boards really are discussing them. They really are debating them and asking questions, which I haven't, in the many years that I've been doing this, seen them discussing before. So I am quietly confident that we are on the brink of real change. And I think things like the Companies Act amendment, obviously there needs to be an external impetus in order for change to happen. I think things like the Companies Act amendment, although not welcomed by everybody, and a lot of people have different opinions on how it's been implemented, it at least signals a move in the right direction.
Leila, thank you so much for your time. That's Leila Ebrahimi there of PWC talking to us about non-executive directors and the way that they feel.